Part 1. The Letter. The winter of 1870 was unforgiving, even by French standards. Captain Alexandre Moreau stood in the officer's tent, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air as he read the letter that would change everything. Outside, the distant rumble of Prussian artillery reminded him that death was always close, but it was the words on the perfumed paper that truly made his blood run cold. The handwriting was familiar, his wife's sister, Marie. But the words were poison. Alexandre, I write to you with a heavy heart and heavier conscience. What I must tell you will wound you more deeply than any Prussian blade, but you deserve to know the truth. Your wife, Isabelle, she has taken a lover. I am so sorry, my dear brother. The man is Lieutenant Dubois. Your own lieutenant. They meet in your home, in your very bed, while you fight for France. Asterisk. Alexandre's hands trembled, though not from the cold. Lieutenant Henri Dubois. The man who had saved his life at Wissembourg. The man he had trusted with his very existence. The man who had dined at his table, who had held his infant son, who had sworn an oath of loyalty not just to France, but to Alexandre himself. Sir? Captain Moreau? Alexandre looked up sharply. A young corporal stood at the tent entrance, saluting awkwardly. What is it? The colonel wishes to see you, sir. You've been granted leave. 7 days. You depart at dawn. Alexandre folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his coat, close to his heart. Thank you, Corporal. Dismissed. As the young soldier left, Alexandre sat heavily on his field cot. 7 days. 7 days to confront the betrayal. 7 days to decide between honor and vengeance. 7 days to either reclaim his life or destroy it utterly. He looked at the small daguerreotype he kept beside his bedroll. Isabelle on their wedding day, radiant in white lace, her dark eyes full of promise and love. Or had it been lies even then? How long had this been happening? Had she ever truly loved him, or had she simply been waiting for him to march off to war so she could throw herself into another man's arms? And Henri. God, Henri. The man was like a brother to him. They had trained together at Saint Cyr. They had fought side by side in Mexico. Henri had been there when Alexandre's father died, had helped him through the darkest moments of his life. And this was how he repaid that bond? Alexandre's hand moved to the saber at his side. The temptation to simply kill them both was overwhelming. A crime of passion, any court would understand. But no. That would be too simple, too quick. They deserved something more, exquisite. As he lay back on his cot, listening to the distant sounds of war, a plan began to form in his mind. It would require precision, timing, and the coldest of hearts. But by the time he was finished, Henri and Alexandre arrived in Paris on the third morning of his leave. The city was transformed by war, nervous, subdued, waiting for the Prussian hammer to fall. But Alexandre barely noticed. His mind was focused on a single address in the Marais district, his own home. He didn't go there immediately. Instead, he went to a cafe across the street and waited, watching. He needed to see for himself. Marie's letter could have been mistaken, or vindictive, or a cruel joke. But deep in his soul, he knew it was true. He had felt it for months, in Isabelle's increasingly distant letters, in the way she wrote about Henri's kindness, in checking on her during Alexandre's absence. At 2 in the afternoon, his patience was rewarded. The door to his home opened, and Henri Dubois emerged, adjusting his uniform jacket. He looked around furtively, the gesture of a guilty man, then strode off down the street with the confident gait of someone who believed he had gotten away with something. Alexandre's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. It was one thing to suspect, another to know. But to see it with his own eyes? That was a different kind of pain entirely. He waited another hour before crossing the street and approaching his own front door. He still had his key, though his hands shook as he inserted it into the lock. The door swung open silently. He had always kept the hinges well oiled. The house smelled different. There was Henri's cologne, expensive and distinctive. And there was something else, a scent of intimacy, of secrets kept in shadowed rooms. Alexandre moved through the ground floor like a ghost, seeing evidence of the betrayal everywhere, 2 wine glasses in the parlor, a man's jacket that wasn't his draped over a chair, the disorder of cushions on the divan that suggested. Alexandre. He turned sharply. Isabelle stood at the top of the stairs, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing a silk robe he had bought her before the war. She looked beautiful and terrible all at once. "You're home," she said, her voice small. There was no joy in it, only fear. "I am," he replied, his voice steady despite the fury raging in his chest. "Surprised to see me?" She descended the stairs slowly, one hand on the banister. "Your letter said nothing about leave." It was unexpected. He watched her carefully, studying every micro-expression. "I wanted to surprise you." "You've succeeded." She reached the bottom of the stairs but kept her distance. "You look well. Thinner, perhaps, but well." War has a way of trimming a man down to essentials. He moved to the sideboard and poured himself a brandy, noting that the bottle was nearly empty though he had left it full. "You look well too, Isabelle. Life in Paris agrees with you." A flash of something crossed her face. Guilt? Defiance? "Alexandre, I met Lieutenant Dubois outside," he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "He was just leaving." Such dedication, checking on the wife of his commanding officer. Isabelle's face went pale. "Alexandre, please." He held up his hand. "Don't. Not yet. I'm tired from the journey. Let me rest, and we'll talk at dinner. Will that be acceptable?" She nodded mutely, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Good," he said, finishing his brandy in one swallow. "And Isabelle? Have Henri join us for dinner tomorrow night." "I insist. There are matters we three must discuss." That evening, Alexandre visited an old friend from his days before the military, a man named Gaston who dealt in information the way other men dealt in wine or cloth. For a price, Gaston could tell you anything about anyone in Paris. "How long?" Alexandre asked, sitting in the dimly lit back room of Gaston's establishment. Gaston, a thin man with nervous hands, consulted his notes. 4 months, perhaps 5. It began shortly after you left for the front. At first, it was innocent enough. He would call on her to bring news from you, to ensure she was well. But by July. Go on. By July, they weren't even trying to hide it. Your servants know. Your neighbors know. Half of Paris knows, Alexandre. I'm sorry. Alexandre stared at his hands. For months. While he had been fighting for France, for their future, they had been playing house in his absence. What else? Dubois has been using your name to secure credit. Small amounts, nothing suspicious individually, but together? He's run up significant debts. Gambling, mostly. And there's talk that he's been selling military supplies on the black market. Using his position to. Enough. Alexandre stood. You've earned your fee, Gaston. But I need one more thing. I need you to deliver a message to Colonel Beaumont at headquarters. What message? Alexandre pulled out a letter he had written earlier and handed it to Gaston. This letter contains information about Dubois' illegal activities. Enough to have him court-martialed and probably shot. But don't deliver it until I give you the signal. Understood? Gaston nodded slowly. You're playing a dangerous game, my friend. The game was dangerous the moment they betrayed me. I'm just changing the rules. The next evening, Henri Dubois arrived at Alexandre's home promptly at 7, wearing his dress uniform and carrying a bottle of wine. Alexandre watched from the window as Henri paused at the door, clearly wrestling with whether to enter. Come in, Henri. Alexandre called out before the other man could knock. No need for formalities between friends. Henri entered, his face a mask of careful neutrality. Alexandre, I was surprised to receive your invitation. I thought. You thought I wouldn't want to see you? Alexandre clasped Henri's shoulder firmly. Nonsense. You've been so kind to Isabelle in my absence. It's the least I can do to thank you properly. They moved to the dining room, where Isabelle had set an elaborate table. She looked hauntingly beautiful in a green silk dress, but her eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands shook slightly as she poured the wine. The dinner began with uncomfortable small talk. Alexandre recounted sanitized stories from the front, careful to keep the tone light. Henri responded with tales of Paris under the threat of siege. Isabelle said almost nothing, pushing food around her plate. You know, Alexandre said, cutting into his beef, I've been doing a lot of thinking at the front. About life, about death, about what really matters. War has a way of clarifying things, Henri agreed, perhaps too quickly. Indeed. Alexandre took a sip of wine. And I've realized something important. Life is too short for pretense, for games, for dishonesty. Don't you agree? Henri's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Of course. Good. Alexandre set down his utensils and looked directly at Henri. Then let's be honest. You've been sleeping with my wife. The room froze. Isabelle gasped. Henri's face drained of color. Alexandre, Isabelle began. I'm not finished. Alexandre's voice was calm, almost gentle. You've been sleeping with my wife, Henri. In my home. In my bed. While I was fighting for France. For us. For our future. Is that accurate? Henri opened his mouth, closed it, then found his voice. Alexandre, we never meant for it to happen. It just happened? Alexandre laughed, a cold, brittle sound. How convenient. How utterly convenient. And tell me, did it just happen when you were using my name to run up debts all over Paris? Did it just happen when you were stealing from the army to pay those debts? Henri's eyes widened. How did you? I know everything, Henri. Everything. I know about the gambling. I know about the stolen supplies. I know that you've been living a life of lies while I've been living in mud and blood. Alexandre stood, placing his hands on the table. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to listen very carefully, both of you. I could kill you both, Alexandre continued, his voice eerily calm. Crime of passion. Any court in France would understand. Or I could simply report you, Henri. Court-martial, execution, disgrace for your family. Is that what you want? No, Henri whispered. No, I didn't think so. Alexandre began pacing. And you, Isabelle? I could divorce you, throw you into the street with nothing. In this social climate, you'd be ruined. No family would take you in. You'd end up like the women in the gutters of Pigalle. Is that appealing? Isabelle was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. But I'm not going to do any of those things, Alexandre said. Instead, I'm going to offer you a choice. Henri, you're going to volunteer for the most dangerous assignments. You're going to put yourself in harm's way again and again. You're going to earn redemption through blood and sacrifice. And if you survive, if you actually survive, then maybe you'll have earned the right to live with the guilt of what you've done. And if I refuse? Henri asked. Then the letter detailing your crimes goes to Colonel Beaumont tomorrow, and you'll be shot for treason within a week. Choose. Henri's shoulders slumped. I'll do it. Excellent. Alexandre turned to Isabelle. And you, my darling wife? You're going to remain here, in this house, as my wife. You'll write me letters. You'll perform all the duties expected of an officer's wife. And you'll do so knowing that every moment of happiness you might try to steal will be poisoned by the memory of this night. You'll live with the knowledge that I know, that I've always known, and that your betrayal is the lens through which I'll see you for the rest of our days. Alexandre, please, Isabelle sobbed. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain. Love is simple. Loyalty is simple. You both chose otherwise. He moved to the door. I return to the front tomorrow. Henri, you'll receive your orders within 3 days. I suggest you make peace with whatever God you pray to. You're going to need divine intervention to survive what's coming. Where are you going? Isabelle asked. Away from here. I can't bear to spend another moment in this house tonight. It smells of lies. He paused at the door. Oh, and Henri? The wine you brought? It was a nice touch. I'll save it for your funeral. 3 months passed. Alexandre returned to the front, throwing himself into the war with a ferocity that impressed even the most hardened soldiers. He led charges that should have been suicidal, held positions that should have been abandoned, and fought with the kind of desperate courage that comes from a man who no longer fears death. True to his word, Henri volunteered for every dangerous mission. He cleared minefields, led reconnaissance patrols into enemy territory, and accepted every assignment that came with a high probability of death. But somehow, impossibly, he kept surviving. Each time, he would return to camp blooded but alive, as if the universe itself was determined to make him suffer rather than die. The letters between Alexandre and Isabelle were masterpieces of cold formality. She wrote of Paris, of their son, of the weather. He wrote of nothing at all, really, just empty words on paper, the correspondence of strangers. Then, in March of 1871, everything changed. Henri was leading a patrol near Belfort when they encountered a Prussian ambush. It should have been a massacre, but Henri fought like a man possessed. He saved 3 soldiers, held off the enemy long enough for reinforcements to arrive, and single-handedly turned a certain defeat into a marginal victory. He was also shot twice in the process. When they brought him back to camp, the field surgeon shook his head. "He won't last the night. Say your goodbyes." Alexandre stood over Henri's cot as the other man struggled to breathe. Henri's eyes found Alexandre's face, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or resignation. "I wanted to die," Henri whispered. "Every mission, every patrol, I wanted it to end. But I kept living. Why?" Alexandre was silent for a long moment. "Because death would have been too easy. You needed to understand what you'd done." "I do." "God, Alexandre, I do." Henri coughed, blood flecking his lips. "I loved her. That's no excuse, I know, but I did. I loved her, and I couldn't stop myself." Love isn't an excuse for betrayal. "No." Henri's hand reached out, groping blindly. Alexandre, after a moment's hesitation, took it. "But maybe forgiveness is possible? Someday?" Alexandre thought about the months of rage, the elaborate revenge, the cold satisfaction of watching Henri suffer. And he found, to his surprise, that the anger had burned itself out. In its place was something else, not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. "Ask me that if you survive," Alexandre said quietly. But Henri never heard him. He died as dawn broke over the frozen battlefield, his hand still clasped in Alexandre's. The war ended in May of 1871 with France's defeat. Alexandre returned to Paris a decorated hero, carrying Henri's personal effects and a letter of commendation for the man who had once been his friend, his betrayer, and finally, his redemption. Isabelle was waiting at the station, wearing black for Henri. She looked older, careworn, the carefree beauty of her youth replaced by something harder, more aware of life's harsh realities. They rode home in silence. It wasn't until they were back in the house, that same house where everything had fallen apart, that Isabelle finally spoke. "Did he suffer?" "Yes," Alexandre said honestly. "But he died bravely. He saved lives. He became, in the end, the man he always should have been." "And us?" Isabelle asked. "What do we become?" Alexandre looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time since that terrible dinner. He saw the guilt in her eyes, but also something else. Remorse. A desire, perhaps, to rebuild what had been shattered. "I don't know," he admitted. "I wanted revenge. I got it. But it didn't make me whole again. Henri's dead, and I'm still broken. You're still here, and I still don't know if I can ever trust you again." "I don't expect you to," Isabelle said. "But I want to try. If you'll let me. Not today, perhaps not for years, but, eventually. I want to try to earn back what I threw away." Alexandre thought about the war, about the men he'd seen die, about Henri's last words. He thought about revenge and honor and the price of both. And he thought about his son, asleep upstairs, innocent of all the adult complications that had nearly destroyed his family. "We'll see," he said finally. "We'll see." It said that Captain Alexandre Moreau never fully forgave his wife, but neither did he divorce her. They lived together in that house in the Marais for 30 more years, bound by duty, by their son, and by the shared memory of a war that had taken so much from everyone. Some nights, Alexandre would stand in his study, looking at the photograph of Henri in his uniform, and wonder what might have been if things had been different. If Henri had been stronger. If Isabelle had been faithful. If he, Alexandre, had been home instead of at war. But mostly, he tried not to think about it at all. Because he had learned the hardest lesson of all, that revenge, no matter how perfectly executed, cannot heal a broken heart. It can only redistribute the pain. And in the end, everyone suffers. The Crimson Oath, the oath of loyalty, of honor, of brotherhood, had been broken that winter in 1870. And though Alexandre lived another 30 years, decorated and respected, A part of him died in that officer's tent when he read Marie's letter. Some wounds, he discovered, never truly heal. They just become a part of you, shaping who you are, reminding you with every beat of your heart that love and war and revenge are all the same thing. They're all about what you're willing to lose to win. ## the end. Runtime approximately 30 minutes when read at a moderate, engaging pace. Historical note ***. While this story is fictional, it is set against the real backdrop of the Franco-Prussian War, 1870 to 1871, a devastating conflict that reshaped Europe and led to the unification of Germany. The themes of honor, betrayal, and personal conflict amid the chaos of war were common in the literature and lived experiences of that era. What would you have done in Alexandre's position? Call to action ***. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if betrayed by those closest to you? Let's discuss.